Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another Bible study. We're going to go through Kings, or a section of Kings. And the reason being is, if you're reading the New Testament, you're in Matthew. Matthew page 1 has this large genealogy, like a list of names, leading up to Jesus being born. And the reason that is there is not just to say, here's a list of old guys that aren't relevant to you. The reason it's there is because it is relevant to you. And it's on page 1 because it mentions books that you should have already read by the time you are reading the New Testament. So that's how we know New Testament and Old Testament are together as one book. It's not two separate books. Like if anyone ever says to you, dude, you don't need to read the Old Testament, it's irrelevant, it's a separate gospel, that is a false teacher. Don't listen to that person. They are directly telling you to go against God. God wants you to read Old Testament and New Testament. And the reason being is because the Old Testament supports the interpretation that your mind will come to, and it will be correct when you read the New Testament afterwards. So, let's go to Kings chapter 10 chapter 11 we'll go to. Sorry, I've been reading 10 and 11. Let's go to 11. Solomon turns from the Lord. King Solomon is mentioned in Kings. That's where you find the details of King Solomon's life. And Solomon was the last of the first generation of kings. Then you get the next 14, and at the end of that 14 you get Jesus being born in Bethlehem in the city of David. David is another one of the kings which was following Solomon. And this is why, if you're in the New Testament reading Matthew, if you've read Kings, Ruth, and you know about Solomon, you know about David, then you won't have any problem with what Matthew is going to tell you. You already know how to interpret it through having read this. So that's what we're going to go through. We're going to go through Solomon's many wives. Now, why is it such a problem that Solomon has like hundreds of different wives? Surely he's a king, he's a really rich king. Why would it be a problem that he has all these wives? Well, we'll find out when God actually tells him why this is such a big deal. And the fact is, had he been following the commands of his Lord and lived a righteous life, he would not have had hundreds of wives, he would only have had one. So this is going to tell us, in the words of God speaking to Solomon, why having one wife is what God commands, and why having many wives is a terrible, disastrous idea. Solomon turns to the Lord. Solomon turns from the Lord. Not to. This is him turning from the Lord. 11. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughters of the Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. So straight away there we can see King Solomon loved many foreign women, and they were the daughters of foreign pagan kings who were against God. So God clearly says throughout the book, if you meet a woman who has a faith in a different god or a pagan religion, or she is hanging on to evil pagan rites, she ain't going to be necessarily the best one for you. But Solomon didn't take this to heart, and he is this wealthy, powerful king. He thinks, well, I can have hundreds of wives. I'll have all the wives I bloody well want. Not a good attitude to take against God when you're Solomon and God is right hovering over you. But that's what he does do. God is kind of merciful of this and allows this, lets him have all these pretty wives hanging around, all these concubines and stuff. But it causes him problems in the end, which he would have avoided had he listened to God in the outset. From the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods and their pagan religions. Solomon clung to those wives that he loved, and he had 700, who were princesses, and 300 of them were concubines, and his heart was turned away. So that is... Look, I'm going to have to end up... Sorry, Solomon, I do apologise for this, but you did this stuff. Solomon's going to be put through the ringer now as we examine his love life, and I've got to say, I really don't feel comfortable examining people's love lives. It should be nothing to do with me. But the fact is, Solomon is in the genealogy of Jesus, and Jesus is my Lord, and Jesus and God the Father, through the Holy Spirit, have led me to read this, so I should know this and understand it. And I think the reason is so that I don't make the same mistakes and so that I recognise why it is a mistake. Not just do it because I got told to, why I should understand why it's bad. So, let's go back through it. The Lord says to the people of Israel, including Solomon, who is a king of Israel, so even the king doesn't get away with this. Everyone from the king down to the lowest peasant has to understand God's word is equally applied to kings, peasants, and everyone in between. You shall not enter into a marriage with them, neither shall they you. So it's a command. Don't marry these wenches, these women, and don't let them propose to you, because we know Ruth married Obed, and Ruth actually, not Obed, who was it Ruth married? Answers on a postcard. Which one did Ruth marry? I can't remember. No, I can't remember. I did it not so long ago. But anyway, Ruth proposes to the man. She goes out into the field of this rich guy, and she proposes to him because he isn't taking the signals that she's putting out. Even though she's putting out good signals and she's pretty and she wants to marry him, he's too thick. He doesn't get it. So she says, why don't you marry me? Take me as your maidservant. And then she sexually rubs his feet and stuff. Anyway, so that's what happens with Ruth. Ruth proposes to him, and Ruth comes to the faith of God. So she didn't have the same God, but she travels with her mother-in-law, and she says to her mother-in-law, I'm devoted to you, O mother-in-law. I will follow you to the ends of the earth. Your God will be my God. And guess whose God is her mother-in-law's God? Well, it's the Lord. So Ruth comes over to the Lord and immediately is blessed, marries a really rich guy who is very important and a moral, holy dude. And Ruth has a child who becomes a king of Israel. And that king has a child who has a child who has a child who is Solomon. So that Ruth is the grandmother of Solomon, effectively. So anyway, that's why we're getting told this. The Lord says to the people of Israel, including the king, you must not marry these foreign pagan daughters, even though they're pretty. You must not enter into a marriage with them. Don't propose to them. And if they propose to you, no, you don't accept it. So 300 of them are wives, and 700 of them, are wives, and 300 of them are concubines. So what that means is 700 he's already married, and 300 he is looking to marry in future. So he's got 700 wives. He's soon to have 1,000 wives when he marries these 300 concubines. And God is trying to tell him, you really only need one wife, Solomon. Because now you've got 1,000 different women telling you exactly how you should feel, what God you should follow. And your heart's going to be corrupted by this influence of 1,000 people. It's virtually a cohort. It's like a military platoon of 1,000 wives all telling you, believe this, do this, I want this, you should be this. And it corrupts his heart away from what God is telling him. So he's losing faith through having these many wives of different pagan religions. When Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. And was the heart of David his father. David was the guy who sets up Bethlehem and builds the temple there. And David was another one who had a really holy life, just kind of screwed it up in one area, but then quickly came back to the faith. And God blessed him and said, your son will be a lamplight, or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote. And that's why Solomon has become this great king. But Solomon seems like he's kind of messing it up at the end here. He's had a great existence up until now, but he has grown fat and arrogant on his wealth and his power. He's forgotten why he got given that wealth and power by God, so that he could serve the Israel nation. Now he's using it to plant his seed in 1,000 different pagan women, and God is saying, you've buggered this right up, Solomon. That's what God is saying. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Ashtoreth is fake early Mary. Like, Ashtoreth is the Queen of Heaven, the celestial virgin who all the pagan gods get reborn from. She can have children, and she can reincarnate people through having them again as children. That's the thing that Ashtoreth does. And now Solomon's married to women who worship that god. So that means he can no longer say that god is evil, everyone who worships that god is evil, because his wife will go, well, you married me. And it's true, they did. He did. And also, Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Milcom is a goddess of perversions and immorality, of concubines. So now he has a wife who prays to the god of sexual immorality. Can you see the issue that Solomon is having now? On one hand, he's got God, who is the God of truth, honour and grace. But he's sharing his bed with a person whose goddess is the Queen of Heaven, pagan god, who is the god of sexual immorality, and is suggesting to him, when they go to bed at night, that he should do these things that that God is telling him to do, and not stick to the stuff God is telling him to do. So he's in two hearts and two minds. He is not united in mind, and he is not going to be able to be truthful, humble, and tender-hearted, because he can't. And we know from 2 days ago video, that's what God also says, and Jesus says it as well. You have to be humble, tender-hearted, honest, and kind. You have to be. That's what God's asking of you. If you marry these women who don't respect those values and they try and bring you sexual immorality, you're going to end up doing it. And that means you're now disobeying God. Even though you didn't mean to, Satan has, the opponent is pulling strings. So that's why that's in there. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow his Lord, and David his father had done. David was not perfect. David that slew Goliath and had the Ark of the Covenant in Israel and made Israel a great nation with millions of people. That David, King David, who is the David who built Bethlehem. King David did not have a perfect life either. He screwed up one time, or two little times and one big time. But the one big time he screwed up, he fell on his knees and he was immediately repentful. He didn't realise he was going to do that. And it was just a moment of stupidity from him, or madness, whatever you want to call it. And he was absolutely destroyed by it. He was distraught. He went, God, please, I'm so sorry. I knew you warned me about this, and I was kind of watching for it, but I just wasn't watching enough, and I buggered it up, and I'm really sorry. And God said, look, it's fine. Just make sure you don't do it again. And he was forgiven. And the rest of his life was good. However, as his David father had done, he did not do, as in Solomon did not do that. So Solomon is now, he's like eking his path away from God. He's separating himself from God. And that means when he's far enough away, he won't be able to hear God's holy message, and he will hit disaster. That's what's going to happen. Solomon built a high place for Shemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Moloch, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods there. So this is what ends up Solomon's thing. I can't believe he's been this stupid. Solomon has married these concubines and these foreign women with pagan gods, to keep them happy so they don't just whinge in his ear all day, because he's a king, he's very busy, he doesn't have time for 1,000 whinging women, even though he's married them all, so he owes them that time. He physically hasn't got it. So to shut them up so he doesn't need to sacrifice that time to them, even though he should, because he married them, i.e. he should have only had one wife, he says, look, ladies, it's fine, you can all have your own temples. Just go to your temples and pray to your gods, and I'll see you in a couple of days, or, whenever. And the temples that he builds, bearing in mind his son David built the temple to God just like 10 minutes ago and then died. So that's there. Solomon follows that by building a high place to Shemosh, the abomination of Moab. Shemosh is like Murdoch. If you know anything about the Akkadian mythology, Marduk or Murdoch is the god who has eyes all the way around his head, a crown of light on his head, and he can speak magic words, and he can control people's minds, and he is the god of libraries and prophecies for the Akkadians, right? So he's a demon, effectively, this guy Marduk or Murdoch. He's got his own temple now in Israel on the East Mountain, right next to God's temple. So you've got God's temple, Marduk's temple. So now people are approaching God's temple and they're going, oh, look at this guy. He's got a really fancy temple with like gold statues out of it. God's temple's modest, and even though it's a beautiful, expensive building, it doesn't have big statues of animals outside it because you're not allowed to do that. The temple for God is all about going in worshipping. It's not about being wowed by magic and statues and stuff. Then you got Murdoch's temple, and it's like, oh, cool, you got dragons, you got like snakes and stuff, and let's go in there instead. So he is taking worship away from God, giving it to a false idol. and he has built the temple for it to shut his wife up. So that's a massive big error. Not only did he do that, you'll know this one, he built a temple to Molech, the abomination of the Amorites. Molech is like the worst pagan idol ever. Molech is a big fire-breathing owl who has one eye and eats child sacrifices and accepts homosexual sacrifices, and then you kill those kids as well. So basically Molech is a big evil owl. Its head can turn all the way around because it can see past, present and future. And the way that you can be told what your past, present and future is going to be by Molech the evil owl is by homosexually raping a child and then sacrificing them in a pit of fire and feeding the bones to Molech. That is the rite of Molech. That's why Molech is known as the evil owl of the Moabites. He's got a temple now too. Solomon's built it next to God's temple, next to Marduk's temple. Now you've got Molech's temple. Doesn't bode well for the future, does it? And then we finish off with verse 8. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifices to their gods. This is directly against God's will. So your son David, King David, built the temple to God and had you. You were prophesied to be the next king of Israel, Solomon, and you became that. But what do you do with your kingship and your wealth that God has given you? You have 1,000 pagan wives, you build these temples to other pagan gods and you allow their worship, and you show that the peasant class, everyone who's not kings, can see, not only is it okay to worship other gods, you're building their temples. God is very angry about this. And this is a direct result of not following the 10 Commandments and the Genesis instruction to have one equal wife, not 1,000 concubine wives, or however many. So we move on. The Lord raises adversaries. So now we're going to find out what happens when you directly go against God. Even though when God's there, you're going, yeah, I'm going to be really obedient. I really respect you, God. You're my only God. Then you go up when your back's turned and you build temples to other gods and you have 1,000 wives. We're going to find out what happens to Solomon. 9. And the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and commanded him concerning the things that he should not go after for other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. God's pretty angry now with you, Solomon, and you're going to find out why God is the last of the beings which you would want to upset. So, why is God angry? It says, the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away. So he could have done all that stuff if he had to, but his heart hadn't turned to it. So it wasn't the physical temples that annoyed God. It wasn't even the 1,000 wives, although that was bad. It was the fact that having the 1,000 wives, having the temples built, turned his heart away from God towards Shamush and Molech. So King Solomon, who is in the genealogy of Jesus, who is going to be born up ahead of this family tree, has now trifled with a pagan idol or two and has broken God's commandments. And God is going to make sure everyone who is seeing this and thinks it's okay learns through Solomon's example. It ain't okay. So all the peasants who see the temple go up, oh yeah, we might go and worship these other gods. We might have 1,000 wives. Now they're going to watch Solomon's destruction, so they know, oh yeah, that's what happens to guys who do that. 11. Therefore, the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I commanded you to keep, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and I will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hands of your son. There can be no bigger curse from God than that. That is the tip of the iceberg, the top of the tree of curses. So let's go through it. Because of the thing he'd done with the temples and the many wives and the turning his heart away from God, effectively he'd lost faith in God through his own stupidity and his own actions. And remember, God appeared to Solomon twice. God physically appeared to Solomon in a human form twice and said, I will bless you, Solomon, if you do what I command you, and you will have a great nation. And it was going really well until now. So he's buggered it up on account of beautiful concubines and false gods. Exactly why commandment 1 is, you shall have no other gods but God. So he's broken the first commandment. Second one, you shall have no false idols for worship, to take worship away from God. So he's broken the first 2. You shall not adultery is number 5, so he's broken number 5. He's broken them all, effectively. And God is saying you went from the top of the tree, a really righteous, holy man and a king of Israel, to this, marrying concubines and worshipping false gods in front of the whole of Israel. And I will punish you by, since you have not kept your word, because he promised he was going to keep the covenant and statutes of God, since you have not kept your word, like I commanded you to do, I said don't break your word, if you make a promise to me, keep it, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and I will give it to your servant. So the guy who serves you today, who you think is worth nothing, you know, your concubine wives have servants as well, and they treat the servants like the lowest in the household. The lowest of your household is more holy and wise than you are, King Solomon. And to make the point of it, says God, I'm going to tear the whole kingdom away from you, and I'm going to put it in the hands of your servant. None of your wives are going to get it. None of your sons are going to get it. You aren't going to get it. All of your wealth and power and title, your kingship, you've just lost it. Congratulations. And not only that, I'm giving it to your servant. Then he gives more detail. Because of your David, your father, you know, King David, who is now in heaven, because King David was good to me, I don't want to embarrass him by making him watch you suffer in life, so I'm not going to take it away from you directly. Your kingdom will pass to another, you'll have a son, but whoever you pass it to, whoever you nominate as the next king, oh Solomon, I'm going to destroy that guy and take it away from him, and his servant will get it. So that means now we've got a prophecy from God that the next king of Israel is going to be done away with and not be the king, and the next one who comes to power is going to be a servant of God. And that's more important than being rich or powerful or wise. Serving God with your heart fully in faith is the one thing that a king of Israel needs, and if you don't have that off your head, or you know, however you get done away with, you will end up done away with, and your kingdom will go to the deserving. In fact, this is another signal that God is true when he says all authority on earth is derived from a heavenly power. So politicians who come to power, who make good promises, God allows them to come to power so that they can fulfill those promises. If they fail, their life will fall apart. Now, they're going to lie to you. They're going to show you propaganda to say, oh no, I'm doing great. I've only got one wife. I don't see concubines. When they're doing that stuff in secret, the end result is going to be career destruction, family destruction, life ends. If they are in a position of power, because we know those in a position of power, especially teachers, are judged to a higher standard because they have people learning from them. And that's responsibility that God has placed on you. So, let's carry on. 13. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son, for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. So he's given him a reprieve. He's saying, I won't take the whole kingdom off you and just make your whole family written out of the genealogy, because, you know, up until now, all of your sons and your grandsons and your great-grandsons have all served me, and you are conspiring to ruin the good work of them. But I promised them that they would be rewarded for their faith and their work, and they will be. So the punishment's only going to be partial. One tribe will stay with one of your sons, who I will choose. Not you. So Solomon doesn't get to choose. And the reason that he's showing this mercy is because David doesn't deserve this from his son. So we know when God also says the sins of the father are visited 3 generations upon the sons, from this point, 3 generations of sons are going to have curses. because of what Solomon has done here with the pagan temples, marrying the concubines. The concubines are all going to have sons, and the sons are going to be born for the pagan temples. So 3 generations of them, they're going to have bad fortunes, and they're going to have sinful lives. But the one who he elects as the next king, and the one tribe with the son he elects, they're not. They're going to be righteous and holy. And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon called Hadad. Hadad the Edomite. Hadad the Edomite. Hadad is a reincarnation of Baal. Now, that isn't in the Bible, but I know that from my archaeological studies, my historical studies. Baal Hadad is the king who said he was the rebirth of Baal. And we know Baal is synonymous with Satan, Allah, and also Molech. All these aspects of Satan are reborn in this guy Hadad. And the Lord has raised him up as the enemy of Solomon. So Solomon must be sat there thinking, this is bad. I'm an old man now. I've done all my battles. I've won all my wars. I've got my kingdom. I've got my 1,000 wives. I don't want to be fighting this guy, Hadad. Look at him. He's like a young warrior and he's evil. He's bloodthirsty and strong. I don't want to fight with him. But God says, nope, you're going to fight this guy now. He's going to be your adversary. Because you built the temples which he prays to. You've got his attention through having ignored my commands and breaking your word and having these 1,000 wives in these daft temples. So even though God's saying, I will raise up an adversary for you, the adversary was already raised. Solomon got his attention through building the temples and marrying the wives of his king. The previous kings of Moab. And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal house of Edom. Where is Edom? Edom is northeast of what today's Jordan is. So it would have been where kind of the Saudi Arabian mountains. So northeast of Israel, across the mountains, quite a way away, across some deserts, is Edom. But Edom grew to power and its borders were shared with Israel after a while. So now, Solomon's at the end of his life. Edom is right there. And Edom is eyeing up these temples. Now, this is the thing. If God's temple that David built had been the only one there, there's a chance they might have been eyeing that temple up for ransack as well, because it was quite a plush temple. But the thing was, David's first and second temples to God were not luxurious show-off temples. The outside of them, while they were very impressive and large, were not gilded with statues and, apparitions of concubines. They were very humble. Even though they did have gold and silver, from a distance you might not have even noticed that. You might have just seen a big building and thought, they probably don't have all that much money. The new temples that he's built for his wives, i.e. the temple of Shemash and the temple of Molech, are wildly, obviously rich. You have these massive gold statues of animals. You have statues of women doing these poses with no clothes on. You have big burning pots of incense that you can see for miles around. And Edom, the up-and-coming empire with this evil guy as their king, smells the incense, spots the gold, and goes, I want that money. Let's go and invade them. So even though God has brought his adversary up, Solomon is to blame for making the adversary attack, which is what's going to happen. God, it's a long one, this, half an hour. Stay with me, we're nearly at the end. So, I will give one of my tribe to your son for the sake of David. Then he says, I'm going to give you an adversary who is going to be Hadad of the Edom kingdom. And then we get to 15. For when David was in Edom, and Joab, the commander of the army, went up to bury the slain, he struck down every man in Edom. God, that's quite this guy's a savage. This guy is absolutely blinking mental. Like, think about that. When King David, Solomon's father, who was a great warrior, who defeated Goliath, like everyone's scared of this guy, when David was alive and he was in Edom, the commander of Edom, who was called Joab, went to bury his dead, and while he was there mourning to bury his dead, He struck the heads off every single man that he found. He mass murdered a whole town of men. He only left women because he was so angry in his mourning. That's the guy who you're now adversaries with, Solomon. That guy's son. Joab's son is the king of Edom now, who's coming for you, who you've just made enemies with, and he's a psychopath. He's young, brave, and a warrior who wants your money. You are old, sinful, and rich, and he's just there. You really buggered this up, Solomon. So anyway, let's carry on. I'm painting a picture for you here about the kings fighting each other and stuff. So, for Joab and all Israel remained there 6 months until he had cut off every male's head in Edom. So, the reason why he does this, by the way, he's mourning the loss of a battle, and the battle was lost in his head because people had started turning towards God, and that means they weren't worshipping Edom's gods. And because they had split faith, they weren't ferocious warriors, and they lost. So he went in, buried his dead, slit the heads off every single Israel male in Edom. He didn't know who was who, so he just killed all of the males. And that meant the next generation to grow up would have never heard of God. They would have never heard of King David. They would have never heard of any Hebrew scriptures, Old Testament, nothing like that. This is a new generation of Edomites who only are going to hear about the Edomite gods, and they're going to only know this guy as the king. And the reason is because they're going to have another war with Israel in future. He knows that, and he doesn't want to have the same mistakes made which lead to defeat. So he's planning on going back again for round number 2 and beating up on Israel, defeating Solomon, taking all their gold and burning the temple of God to the ground. That's his plan. But Hadad fled to Egypt, together with certain Edomites of his father's servants, Hadad still being a little child. They set out from Midian and came to Paran, and took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him an allowance of food and gave him land. So this guy, now that Edom's been destroyed, he's a little kid. His dad has lost a war, basically, and all the other men have been killed. He's the last Edomite man. He's gone into hiding in Egypt so that he doesn't get assassinated, because people know he'll be the next king, because he's the only man left. So he goes to hide in Egypt. Egypt takes him in and hides him and gives him a parcel of land, an allowance of food, and says, you don't have to work. I'm going to keep you alive, and you will be tutored with the intent of going back to Edom and being their king when you come of age. So we have an indication that Edom and Egypt have a similar pagan cult system. They both worship the same gods, and it is not the God of Israel. So now Israel's in the middle, and through Solomon's stupidity, philandering, and his 1,000 wives and 300 concubines, 300 of which are concubines, he's made enemies with Edom, he's made enemies with Egypt, he's made enemies with Paran, which is like where Lebanon, Syria kind of territory is today. He's surrounded Israel with enemies through philandering with these women and not obeying God. And his heart is turned. He doesn't even have any faith. So it's not looking great for him. And I think we'll end on verse number 19. And Hadad found great favour in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave him the marriage of the sister of his own wife, Taphenas the queen. So this guy is growing in power while Solomon's is shrinking. Now, the king of Edom, even though he's in exile and he's living in the Pharaoh's place, the Pharaoh has given him a wife who is a queen. So when he comes of age, he's now going to be in control of part of Egypt's lower kingdom. He'll be the king of Egypt's lower kingdom. And he will be the king of the Edomites. So he will own a territory on either side of Israel. And he will be able to do a flanking invasion on either side of Israel. So God has set this up because of Solomon set it up really, but God's telling him, when your kingdom is torn away from your son and given to your servant, the servant is going to be my servant, who is not like you, Solomon, who's buggered it up at the last minute. And the reason why this is definitely going to happen is because little Israel's in the middle. And he's going to have a civil war and divide into two kingdoms. And while that's happening, the entire round about you is going to be enemies looking to come in. And they're going to be Egypt and Edom. Evil guys with brave, bloodthirsty, cult-like pagan warriors as kings. And the riches of the Egypt queen. All because Solomon needed to philander. All because he couldn't keep his bloody pants on. So let this be the lesson of this video as we come to the end, 35 minutes. The summary is, of Kings, this part. God will not punish you straight away. He will give you lots of time and mercies. And if you stop doing the thing wrong that you're doing, there's virtually no more punishment than the stuff you cause for yourself. However, if you are a king, a priest, or a teacher, and in your prayers you openly lie to God, thinking that you can play both sides of the field, thinking that you can say, yeah, sure, God, I'll do exactly what you've asked me to do, and I'll teach people right, but then in your own behaviours you don't do that, you are planting a bad seed in fertile ground where God's seed should be planted, which means God's seed will not be able to grow, and out of the ground will grow sinful bad fruits such as 1,000 wives, 300 of them being concubines, and their sons will be evil and weak. Your kingdom will be destroyed through your own hand, and your 3 generations of sons will be the ones to suffer your stupidity. So, have one equal wife, and when you pray to God, have faith in only God. Then this stuff won't happen to you. And by the way, if you want to hear the juicy details of what does happen in that coming war, Kings and the following 2 books will go through all those gory details. So, that's the end of this video. Hope you've enjoyed that and you learnt something. God bless you all, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye now. He just couldn't keep it in his trousers, could he? So Solomon came up short, and hopefully you will not. So that's the end of this video. Another one bites the dust. God bless you all. Have a lovely evening, and I'll see you beautiful lovelies in the next one. Bye then. Bye 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 bye.